In this video, I'll quickly go through the best camera settings you can use if you're shooting with a camera instead of your phone. I'll be showing these settings on a Sony camera, but the main principles apply to other brands too, like Canon, Fuji, or whatever else. So when it comes to shooting video, the main things you need to get right, whether you're filming yourself or someone else, are the shooting format, frame rate, aperture, shutter speed, white balance, and ISO. First up, let's go with the format and frame rate. You need to choose the format and FPS you're shooting in. On this camera, I can shoot in 4K or HD, and I'll have MP4 files in the end. On higher end cameras, you may have the option to shoot in RAW or in other formats. But that being said, I'd always recommend 4K if your camera can do it. That's basically the standard now on most platforms, and you want to get the most out of your gear. Then going to the record settings. On this camera, it's literally called record settings. And this is where you choose FPS and bitrate. In this case, I can choose between 24 and 30 FPS when shooting in 4K. Now, depending on your camera or your region, it might be 25 and 50 instead, but I'm using the NTSC format, not PAL. Now, 24 FPS and 25 will have a more cinematic look to it, while 30 and 50 will have a smoother motion. For talking head videos, 30 is often used. It's what I'm using right now. When it comes to the bitrate settings, go with the highest one for the best quality. In this case, 30 FPS at 100 megabit per second. Bear in mind that on some cameras, higher resolution, FPS and bitrate settings might result in a crop. For instance, on this camera, it also results in a crop. This is not the full 4K frame that this camera can do. If I were to shoot in 4K 24 FPS, that is without a crop, this frame would be wider at the same focal length. Once you've set your format and frame rate, the next thing is the shutter speed. For video, your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. So if you're shooting at 24 FPS, your shutter speed should be 1:48. Most cameras don't have 1:48 exactly, so 1:50 is fine. And same with 30 FPS, you'd use 1:60. For 60 FPS, you'd use 1:120. And so on. The reason this matters is motion blur. That natural cinematic motion blur you see comes from having your shutter speed at double your frame rate. If you wave your hand in front of the camera, that blur you see is what makes movement look natural. Some professional cameras like BlackMagic use shutter angle instead of shutter speed, and in that case 180 degrees gives you the same effect. Now if your shutter speed is too high, you lose that blur and your footage start looking unnatural. So just set it and forget about it, you won't have to touch it again. After that, what you can play with is aperture. Now, in photography, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO all work together to control exposure. But in video, your shutter speed stays fixed. So you're left with aperture and ISO. Aperture is what controls how much light enters the lens. In this clip, for example, as I'm moving the aperture ring, you can see how it opens and closes. And the aperture also affects your depth of field. A lower f number, like f1.8 or f2.8, means more light and a blurrier background. The lower you go, the better your camera will perform in low light as well. If you're shooting in a bright environment, you might need to stop down, raise the f number so your image isn't overexposed, but then you lose some of that shallow depth of field. One way around this is to use an ND filter, which I'll talk about in another video, but in a nutshell, it's like sunglasses for your lens. It cuts the light so you can keep your aperture low even in bright light. For instance, in the case of this talking head video, if you look in the background, the sun is still up, so this spot is really bright. I'm using an ND filter right now, and I'm gonna show you what it's like if I take it off. Now, as you can see, the whole image is super bright now, and that part is overexposed, and also some other parts of the image. Try to adjust the lighting in the room rather than raising your aperture too much. I'd say in general, f2.8 works really well, especially if you have a deep background, because to blur out a shallow background, you'll need to go with a very low f-stop. Now let's talk ISO. ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. The tricky part is that every camera has a native ISO, a value where it performs best with the least amount of noise. You can look this up for your camera and try to stay close to it, or you can set ISO to auto, but if your lighting conditions change while filming, the camera will adjust ISO automatically and your brightness will shift. That can be distracting. If you're just starting out, auto ISO is absolutely fine. But if you want more control, I'd say keeping it between your camera's minimum and 400-500, obviously depending on how bright or dark your space is. What I would absolutely not recommend is compensating a dark exposure with ISO. So if your image is underexposed because you don't have enough light and it's dark in the room, or you're shooting outside at night, if you crank your ISO all the way up, a lot of noise will be introduced into your image and it will look like shit. Always try to get more light or go low in aperture rather than cranking the ISO up. Now let's move on to autofocus, especially if you're filming yourself. Now, not all cameras have great autofocus, but most newer models do. Sony cameras, for example, are amazing at this. If your camera has face and eye detection, turn that on because it'll recognize your face and keep you sharp even if you move around, like I'm doing now. It also lets me pick which eye to track, but that's not really important for us. What is important, however, is the speed of the autofocus. Transition speeds controls how quickly the camera shifts focus between objects. If it's too fast, your footage might look jittery or jumpy. Responsiveness controls how quickly the camera reacts to new objects in frame. I keep both settings somewhere in the mid-range, that way it looks natural and doesn't jump around too much. Some cameras also have an object showcase mode, which is very helpful if you're showcasing products like a makeup guru. Another setting regarding autofocus is your focus mode. Make sure that it's set to continuous autofocus, AFC. That way the camera keeps adjusting focus as you move. Now for the focus area, I recommend setting it to wide. That way the camera tracks across a broad area and keeps you in focus as you move around. All right, picture profiles. This will obviously very much depend on your camera. Right now, I'm using HLG3, which isn't a completely flat profile. So without any color grading, the image is not completely bleached, but it still gives me some flexibility for color grading. If you're not planning to grade much, you can use a standard picture profile or some of these other profiles with some color. Some cameras offer S-Log, which gives you more dynamic range but requires more work in post. If you do use a flat profile like S-Log, enable the auto assist function if your camera has it. That way you will see a preview of what the graded image will kind of look like. Otherwise, your screen might look super flat and washed out while shooting. Now, white balance is one of the most important things when it comes to the colors of your image. Regardless of what picture profile you set for your camera, if your white balance is not good, your image will look really bad. So auto white balance is good. The safest way is probably setting it up manually, holding up a white piece of paper and capturing that color temperature, and then your camera will set a Kelvin value, or you can set the Kelvin value manually, comparing it what you see through the camera and what you see in real life. But if it sounds too complicated, go with auto white balance, and if your image looks very horrible, then try to set it up manually. Finally, audio. If you're using an external microphone, as you should, but you're using one that's plugged directly into the camera, you'll want to test the audio levels in all cases. Aim for peaks around -12 decibel when you're speaking at a normal volume. If you're shouting, it might go higher, and that's okay. Just don't let it peak into the red because it'll distort. Now, if you can adjust the input level on your microphone as well, this is not a microphone, but it's something similar. If you have something like that, then it's worth doing some research regarding what's better if you turn the input level up on the microphone or on the camera, because if your camera doesn't have a good internal audio recorder and you crank up the input value on your camera, the sound might get noisy. Whereas if you turn it up all the way on the microphone and you leave the camera on a lower value, the sound quality might get better. But it's something very specific that you have to experiment with and do research on. So I'll just leave it there. So those are the essential settings to get the best results shooting video with a camera, especially if you're filming yourself. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you've got any questions or requests, drop them in the comment section. I'd love to make videos on whatever you're curious about. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later, guys.